Continuing our coverage, let's bring in former Caracas chief of station for the CIA, Rick De La Torre. It's so great to see you, especially considering, Rick, most Americans, they have not been on the ground. They have not been surveilling Maduro like you have. Tell us about what you witnessed of his regime.
Well, my time at the helm was during a period of time where Maduro was firmly entrenched, was running his criminal network over a number of years. His inner circle was just as guilty in so many of the things that we've now charged Maduro with. That is the human trafficking, the sale of drugs into the United States, material support to terrorist organizations from Colombia within their borders. And then on the political front, his open door policy, red carpet treatment to our enemies, to include Hamas, Hezbollah, China, Russia, and in particular the Cuban intelligence apparatus that really terrorizes not just the Venezuelan people, but keeps them in place so that they could go ahead and take the oil that Venezuela produces and they could use it and profit off it. So we're talking about a guy who was a criminal in every sense of the word.
Well, you mentioned the intelligence community, and we've heard a lot about the military side of this operation over the weekend, but how much of a role would the intelligence community have played in the capture of Maduro, tracking his whereabouts?
Oh, a very significant role. I mean, tracking his whereabouts is certainly a critical thing, right? You need to know where the target and the objective is before you can do anything. But it's more than that too, right? You need to establish patterns of life. What time does he wake up? Where does he go? Where does he hang out? Who does he around? What happens on Tuesdays that doesn't happen on Fridays? So once you understand and baseline that information, then you could start to see those patterns and see how you could use them to your advantage. But like like it was mentioned in the report, these are operations that take months and months of planning and practice, and it is really mind-boggling if you look at the man hours that go into this kind of work. But the result is the professionalism, the exceptional results of this operation that I think is probably going to go down in history as probably one of the greatest military operations ever conducted by our U.S. military.
Well, historic for so many reasons. I mean, not just considering the arrest, but the perp walk, even his comments today during his, initial appearance in court, maintaining that he is still president. What are you reading into the President Trump's comments about running Venezuela as it relates to oil infrastructure, which you touched on, and also Venezuela's capabilities on the ground? I mean, what needs to happen now?
Well, so obviously the security situation needs to be brought under control, and I think Venezuelans deserve to have um, um, some shred of peace and decency within their lives at home. That's one of the reasons I think why this administration took the criticized by many approach of allowing Delcy Rodriguez, who is just as guilty, just as much of a criminal, to remain in power for the short term, right? The concern there is obviously, yes, there is a very strong exile community. 1/3 of the entire population of Venezuela lives outside its borders. And if you look at the leaders of, the opposition leaders, all of them are currently in exile. So you need to run the country from day to day, and you need to do it right away. So you work with what you've got. And sadly, we've got to pinch our noses and work with Delcy Rodriguez for the time being.
Only have about 20 seconds. How does Maduro's capture influence China, Russia, and Iran? How do you see that playing out in the short term?
It's already starting to happen. They're realizing that the Western Hemisphere is basically off limits to them. They're starting to recalculate what they're going to do. I think the show of force also shows that we're serious and that they're going to have to go back to square one when it comes to their planning or considering of doing anything in Taiwan in particular. All the weapon systems that Maduro regime spent from China and Russia, they all failed. None of them worked.
Implications on a worldwide stage, something that we are closely watching. Former Caracas chief of station for the CIA, Rick De La Torre, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
The administration says it will help restore stability in Venezuela until a new government can take shape, and that could include sending in troops if security forces collapse or if the current interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, stops cooperating with the U.S. Joining us now to discuss is retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General John Teichert and the former Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for the Air Force International Affairs. Good morning to you, sir. Welcome to the National News Desk.
Jan, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've commanded overseas forces, leading international operations, and advised senior leaders. So how does removing Maduro strengthen foreign policy and restore deterrence that's been missing for years against these bold and aggressive cartel-backed regimes?
Jan, I think it starts with realizing why this matters to the United States. And there are two primary reasons. Number one, Venezuela has been at the nexus of all of the problems in the Western Hemisphere for several decades. And number two, they have been a safe haven for America's enemies in our own backyard. And when you talk about specifically deterrence, that's stopping the adversary from doing the things you don't want them to do. And it hinges on strength of capability and strength of will. And we no doubt demonstrated both of those on Friday night, similarly to the way that we did so in Iran in June. And that helps our adversaries realize that we are serious in capability and will, and they must not do those things that we do not want them to do.
Right. And we also know Maduro wasn't a one-man operation. I mean, he was part of this narco state with generals, judges, cartels in place there. So how hard is it to dismantle the system, especially when you have these regime holdovers still controlling security forces there on the ground?
Jan, you won't see the American Armada in the Caribbean go away anytime soon because it provides a very real presence and threats that if anybody tries to undermine U.S. interests and currently Rodriguez as the leader of Venezuela, then the United States will act. And just our presence there and the demonstrated capability from Friday should keep those elements in check. But we'll be watching closely how Rodriguez is doing in her governance of Venezuela to make sure that it's aligned with our interests and ultimately the interest of the Venezuelan people.
Right, because the president hasn't ruled out boots on the ground if there is a security collapse under her, right? So what's your thoughts on that? What does that look like?
It's not going to happen anytime soon. There are a couple of markers of things that would need to happen before we would actually do that. Number one, we would start to see Rodriguez backtrack from support from the United States or of U.S. interest. We're not going to likely see that. We want to keep an eye on making sure that there aren't loyalists to Maduro, like the Interior Minister or the Defense Minister, that try to replace her. And then the president has promised that there was a phase 2 of strikes that he didn't use on Friday night that would likely be used against large-scale activity in the defense industry in Venezuela that would act against U.S. interests. And that still remains on the shelf as an active plan. And we would implement that type of phase 2 strike before we would ever start thinking about boots on the ground.
All right, that's actually very good information there. Now, some look at history and point to Panama or, Iraq as a model for perhaps what we should and should not repeat, although every situation and every country is still very different. How would you advise the president right now, and what lessons have we learned from past operations?
Jan, one of the biggest ones is that you don't want to dismantle a functioning government. So now that Maduro is gone and Rodriguez is in power temporarily, you want to make sure that the government continues to function and you don't purge major elements of the government so that there is not a power vacuum in the country. And we're doing that well. But the other piece of it that we haven't talked about enough is quickly establishing the duly elected government in Venezuela. They had elections in 2024. Massively popular leaders like González in exile in Spain and the Nobel Peace Prize winner Machado won that election. Let's not linger and allow Rodriguez to be a long-term figure. Let's use her as a transitional figure and get those very popular figures in place as quickly as possible so that you've got a mandate of support from Venezuela and likely the international community as well.
Yeah, and finally, there's this economic element, right? Because controlling oil revenue, sanctions relief, and access to global markets also very critical moving forward. So what does success look like a year from now if all goes well, and what will you be closely watching?
Jan, we need to make sure that there's this quick transition of governments from Rodriguez to the popularly elected government of González and Machado. And then we need to keep an eye on stability factors, security factors, and economic factors to make sure that they are flourishing and that we are purging those negative elements of the government that have caused it to be the nexus of problems in the Western Hemisphere and that safe haven for adversaries of America in the region.
All right, General, we appreciate your insight at this historic moment. Really, some of the hardest decisions are being made right now. Thank you also for serving our country.
It's my privilege. Thanks for having me.